Welcome to the world of CDR Beer Lab, the fast and easy-to-use analysis system designed for breweries of all sizes. With CDR Beer Lab, you can monitor in real time the quality of your beer, from the grain to the finished product, analyzing parameters like bitterness, color, alcohol content, and much more, all directly in your brewery. No more waiting for lab results. As the Brewfeast Brewery claims, with CDR Beer Lab, the immediate benefit was undoubtedly the speed of execution in the various analyses that we undertake here in-house in the internal laboratory. Simple, accurate, and fast. With CDR Beer Lab, controlling every stage of production is within everyone's reach. Let's discover how to enhance your beer with a professional tool and immediate results.
Hey everyone, it's good to see you all. I'm going to actually present now. My name is Lindsay. It is nice to be a part of the craft beer professionals community. I haven't actually done a craft beer professionals talk since like 2020. So I am thrilled to be back in our little virtual space. And I hope you all are enjoying the conference so far. I've been tuning in as well. And I gotta say, the presenters are top notch. So I am really happy to be a part of it. So today I'll give myself a little bit more of a introduction. Again, like I said, my name is Lindsay Barr. I am a founding partner and CSO of DraughtLab. We are a sensory software company. I am a sensory scientist. I also moonlight as an adjunct professor for the University of California at Davis. I teach sensory there for the Master Brewers program. So sensory is kind of the name of the game. All things flavor, training, that's basically my deal. I've been with DraughtLab since 2016. That's when we founded it. Before that, I worked for New Belgium Brewing Company for about 10 years as the sensory and consumer research specialist there. So lots of fun areas to pull from in our discussions about beer flavor. So today I'm doing something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about staff training primarily. So the title of this talk is Education as Engagement, a New Approach to Brewery Training. And this project that I'm going to discuss today kind of came about as a result of a thought experiment that we were doing at DraughtLab. And the thought experiment was more or less, would it be possible for a staff training programs to simultaneously achieve two functions? One, of course, the obvious, getting your staff trained to confidently and accurately sell your products, because that's why you train in the first place, if we're real about it. And at the same time, could that mechanism build the basis for an internal professional sensory program? Can it build the foundation of an internal sensory program? And the challenge that we gave ourselves in this was, how do we do this without any need for an administrator? Something that we've heard a lot is we just have a hard time devoting an entire person to this. And so how do you do this? How do you achieve this without any need for an administrator? So that's kind of the challenge that we gave ourselves and the thought experiment that kind of brought this project about. So today I want to paint a little bit of a picture of how we got there and give you some techniques that we've been painstakingly testing to use specifically in your tasting room. So what does a well-trained staff look like? First and foremost, let's paint that picture. What does a well-trained staff look like? Well, a well-trained staff communicates clearly and confidently with their customers. We've all walked through the tap room and heard a server absolutely nail this. In an interaction with a customer, if you hear somebody say, oh, if you like this beer, you're definitely going to like this one. It has tropical floral notes. It has a little bit less alcohol than the one that you usually get or whatever. And you know when you see it, when you hear a server really nailing that customer interaction. They communicate clearly, they communicate confidently, and they know what the hell they're talking about. So that's number one kind of hallmark of a great server. The second thing is they focus on the details that actually matter. So when talking to a customer, they have the wherewithal to select the information that's relevant to the interaction, and they have the intuition to know when it's okay to go a little bit deeper. They know when you're not talking to a beer nerd and you just got to get the right pilsner or the right lager or the right ale or whatever into your customer's hand. And they also have the intuition to know when you can be a little bit nerdier, maybe talk about cryo hops or something like that, a little bit deeper with your customers. So we know when we hear a great interaction like this, where they're focusing on the amount of details that really matter for that sales interaction. And the third, kind of obvious, they just get it right. They just simply get it right. We kind of take for granted the importance of pouring and serving beer properly. My coworker was telling me the other day that he went to a brewery and they had something on a side pool handle, and the server had been there for many years, and he ordered the side pool beer, and the server poured it for them, and they poured it with no foam whatsoever. So that is an example of not getting it right. You know, you put all this money into this equipment and you expect the outcome to be this big, beautiful, tight foam that you get. And the server didn't pour it with any foam. So what you kind of have to try to do. So we kind of take it for granted that like properly pouring, properly serving is a huge part of the customer interaction, and it helps people get back into the door. So they know how to pour, they know what to pour, they know how to handle the service portion of the job. So they just get it right. And the last thing is they sell more beer. I was talking to somebody in the wine world the other day, and I asked him exactly this question: how do you know that you have a great server? And his answer was really simple. It was their sales. And wine is a little bit different because you're selling like subscriptions and that kind of thing. And he's like, whatever they do, as long as like they can get wine into people's hands and sign people up for subscriptions, I'm happy. So they sell more beer. So a lot of this kind of boils down to how well you as a server, how well you know your products, and how well you can communicate the benefits of your products to the customer. So a lot of this kind of boils down to knowing your products if you kind of look at all these bullet points. And over the last couple of years, we've been interviewing a bunch of people across the kind of supply chain within the customer facing world. So we've been interviewing managers, we've been interviewing educators, front of house staff, production, and across the board, we hear two basic things from these different entities. First, from staff, we always hear, every single brewery that I went to, I heard this from front of house. I always hear that talking about flavor is the most intimidating part of the job. It's like learning a new language. It can feel really scary. They say not only is it tough to talk with customers, but it's even harder to talk to brewers. That's right, brewers in this virtual space. Your front of house staff is generally pretty intimidated by the conversations that they have with you, at least initially when they're first starting. So they say that talking about flavor is incredibly intimidating when they first start a job, and even if they've been there for a while. The second thing that we hear primarily from managers is that being able to talk about flavor is incredibly impactful when it comes to selling and upselling your products. So if your staff can connect customers to the beer that they love, they can, expand their palate. They can essentially get customers to have a better time in your brewery. But those customers, more importantly, will be probably more inclined to buy that extra 6-pack or go tell a friend about your brewery as well. So talking about flavor is intimidating for front of house, and it's also the most impactful thing when it comes to selling your products. But the age-old question, with no time and a constantly rotating workforce, how do you train them? This is, again, the age-old question. Chances are, I would wager to bet that you are operating with limited resources. You probably have new and seasonal folks coming in all of the time. Your workforce is constantly rotating, which means that your staff expertise level ranges anywhere from experts to no experience whatsoever. So it can be kind of tough to strike a balance. I can tell you, I can't tell you how many people that I've spoken with for the last couple of years since we've been working on this that say that they used to have a training program, but it went away because it was taking too much time. It seemed almost futile with that kind of shifting workforce. And they just didn't really see a sustainable way of building a training program, at least in this kind of idealistic format of what a training program should, quote unquote, look like. Which is why, most breweries now that I talk to and visit are essentially checking the training box, either by having informal conversations about beer with staff, either when a new product comes up or when there's a new employee in the front of house, or just, maybe writing brand descriptions and shoving those in a notebook and keeping that behind the bar. Again, I would bet every single person in here has that notebook behind the bar. Every bar that I visit, when talking about this stuff, I ask to show me your notebook, and everybody can show me a notebook. So this is usually what people are doing to kind of check that training box. And again, there's really no judgment there. There's a lot going on in the brewery, which is why we kind of set out to build a mechanism that would not require an administrator. So again, back to that thought experiment that I mentioned that we did at DraughtLab, it was to imagine a world in which staff just had the tools that they needed to decode their products on their own without any kind of need for an administrator or a trainer or teacher. So what if staff could learn what they needed to know to effectively sell your beer on their own? That was kind of the idea with this. Obviously, the impact would be huge, right? If this was possible, first and foremost, I bet that most folks here are either trainers or brewers or people that are kind of in the position to be educators. The person whose role that might be, maybe you, to educate on your brands, you just got some time back. I guarantee it's not your full job. It's something that you are kind of doing because you need to do it. So you just got some time back, first of all. Second of all, your staff gets what they need to feel empowered to connect with your customers, not just with their customers, but also with your production staff, like your brewers. So how do we do this? How do we get your staff the training that they need so that they can decode your products on their own? So what should they know? What do they need to know? So let's start there. There's a temptation to teach them everything that there is to know about beer, starting at ancient Mesopotamia and the first serendipitous fermented grain product that was essentially beer. Most people don't even know that. In fact, your customers are probably going to get annoyed with you if you talk about, where beer's origins came from. So there's a temptation to teach everything. What is barrel aging? What's the difference between a barrel and a foeder? What's, kind of hop products are out there? What is the anatomy of a hop cone, all the things about agriculture, the science, the chemistry, the specific brewing processes, all these different idiosyncratic styles that we have, the microbiology, all of the esoteric kind of flavor terms. There's that temptation to just go real hard and teach absolutely everything. But not everyone needs to have the expertise of a brewer. In fact, a lot of times it can backfire. I see this kind of getting carried away happens a lot, specifically when trainers are brewers. We can't help ourselves. We feel like we need to bestow all of this wisdom upon all of our staff. So when talking to brewers, we found that there's a bit of a frustration that maybe some of what they are training on isn't being retained. It can often seem daunting to come up with that kind of right balance of what do they actually need to know. It takes a lot of time. It's not always effective. So we also hear on that note from front of house that the training that they receive from brewers isn't always relevant, because you are going into all this stuff that is admittedly very cool, but doesn't really apply in that specific sales interaction. So they can often leave feeling more confused, maybe more lost, maybe more intimidated after these types of trainings that just go way too deep. So only a fraction of what you can learn about beer actually applies when you're trying to sell it. So we needed to kind of come up with a way of distilling down into bite-sized pieces the things that they needed to know, and kind of leave out the parts that you don't need to know. So if you want to be efficient with your training program, our trick that was like the aha moment is just to use your tap list as the guide. So let's look at a tap list here. This is from my friends at Strange Bird Brewing Company in Rochester, New York. Go Western New York. So this is kind of the targeted approach that we came up with. You know, if the 99.9% of the questions that you're going to get from your customers are going to have to do with your menu. That's what they're here to do. They're here to drink your beer. They're here to order your food. So focusing on your menu is the right approach. So this is that targeted approach. And if you look closely at most of these top lists, you uncover that the most important aspects of your product are already written out there. You'll notice that the most important piece is, you know, specifically what you sell, specifically like the brand name. So, you know, you can be the best Cicerone in the world, but if you don't know the names of the brands that you're selling, then you really don't have anything. So every single person needs to know the names of the brands and what they generally are. This is, of course, very basic, but how are you supposed to sell your brands if you don't know what they're ordering? So this is kind of first and foremost. Brand name. Second of all, you kind of have to have an idea of what the correlating styles are for the brand names. So styles and how they compare to one another. I'm sure you've all experienced something similar, but you know, overhearing a customer order a lager to be told, we don't have a lager, when you had a Pilsner or you had a Kolsch or a Helles, then you know that's a missed opportunity for just not understanding how these kind of basic styles interact and correlate with one another. It's, you know, when you think about it, we joke about that, but like when you think about it, it's a really reasonable mistake. One of the things that we've done with our team, our DraughtLab team, is we have experts, but we also have people that really don't have any background in beer. And when we were testing this product that I'm talking about, we had them look through these lessons. And if they couldn't do it, if they were lost, if they're like, I don't know, how am I supposed to know what a Kolsch is? Then it was kind of like our, okay. Like why would you know? You don't have to know. You do marketing. Like, of course you don't need to know about like the difference between a Kolsch and a Helles. So it's a very reasonable mistake. But it's also a missed opportunity to delight a customer. So they kind of have to know these basics. They also have to know the basic flavors. So if someone were to ask you the difference between two IPAs, which as a customer, I always ask this when I go to a brewery. If you have 10 IPAs, I kind of ask what the general differences are. Reasonable question. So if someone were to ask the difference between your IPAs, you would want to hear your staff respond with something meaningful. Something like, I don't know, Mango Slam has a high ABV, low bitterness, a lot of tropical notes, while the West Coast Dank Fest or whatever has moderate alcohol, some earthy notes, moderate bitterness, and some pine and citrus flavors. That would be a great example of a good interaction where the customer now knows what to expect generally and is more empowered and confident in that purchase. And then everything else, you know, that sticks out on a menu, like ABV, IBU, price, format, they should all be able to talk about that. So all we did when talking about this and coming up with our DraughtLab learning product was to look at menus and figure out what staff would need to know in order to talk up, down, and around any menu. So, so they need to know the menu. We got that. Now to the nerdy how. So settle in, everyone, to kind of like be a part of the conversation about the how. And this is where I'm going to get into the nerdy kind of theory that goes into how people learn, and some of the mechanisms that we used to integrate into our specific approach for training. So the experiential learning theory is what I want to introduce you to. The experiential learning theory is where sensory comes into play. It is the most effective way to learn something. Experiencing it is the most effective way to learn something. It's also the best way to engage with your products, to engage with your community as well. There's a really strong correlation with hands-on learning techniques and student motivation, student achievement, and student retention, having that hands-on experience. So the experiential learning theory, or ELT for short, puts the learner at the center, not the instructor. The instructor is often at the center. This professorial kind of person is often at the center of the learning experience. But if you put the learner at the center, you have to really be honest with what their needs are and adjust, learning, your learning mechanisms to their needs. So it puts the learner at the center. This means that the learner has the chance to learn by doing and not be afraid of making mistakes. One of the things that we say at DraughtLab all the time is fail in private. I don't know if you can see my whiteboard behind me, but I'm learning Spanish. And one of the things that I've noticed when learning Spanish is if you are afraid to fail, if you're afraid of saying tengo instead of quiero or whatever, then like you're going to have a hard time really picking it up. You kind of have to be able to learn really confidently and screw up a lot and be corrected. So can't be afraid of making mistakes, which means you have to create an environment that's conducive to trying stuff out and not being wrong. So if this sounds a lot like sensory, it should sound a lot like sensory. This is essentially what sensory is. In sensory science, we use concrete examples, so flavor, concrete examples to teach about these broader kind of abstract concepts and give tasters time for internal reflection and space to act and describe an experience that they are having. So with experiential learning, you have this kind of cycle in front of you. There are basically two planes. There's the grasping plane and there's the transforming plane. Grasping of a concept happens both through concrete experience, that bubble at the top, and through abstract conceptualization, that bubble at the bottom. So like in sensory, we need both. We need both concrete experience, so the experience of tasting something, and we also need abstract thought to connect that experience to something that gives you a broader sense of the world. So if you had just concrete experience without any kind of contextualization, sure, you would be able to recall a flavor, but you really wouldn't be able to deduce how it applies to your products and your process. And you certainly wouldn't be able to extrapolate where you might see that flavor show up across your products. So this happens kind of a lot with attribute training. If you know chemical names, if you experience these chemical names, but you don't have any idea about why they matter or how they connect to your product, then you kind of like really, you'll have a harder time retaining it. And it's also kind of like, well, who cares? And the reverse is true, though. If you only stayed in kind of the academic learning, the abstract conceptualization, like the thinker guy, if you were only, doing the book kind of reading, you would be able to like have all these concepts, but you wouldn't be able to connect them to experiences that you're going to have in the real world. And we all know these people. These people are really book smart, but they have no real experience in the world. So let's see. So that's what happens if you focus on the abstract without any kind of concrete experience. So in order to grasp a concept, you need to have the experience and the abstract conceptualization. The second plane is that transforming plane. So transforming is basically transforming that experience into knowledge. So transforming experience into knowledge, that happens how? It happens through giving space to reflect on the experience that you're having. So that reflective observation. And it also happens through the space to actively experiment. Again, with my Spanish analogy, if I didn't have the space to actively experiment and put together a sentence, then I would never really be able to complete this circle. I would never really be able to become fluent. So if someone's to transform their knowledge, learners have to be given that space to reflect and to act on what they've internalized. Yeah, so in sensory, we do this all the time, but I've seen plenty of instances where it looks like sensory is being done, like the mechanisms are kind of being done, but the experiential learning theory is being broken majorly. So what experiential learning is not is also an important thing to understand. First of all, it's not passive. Experiential learning doesn't just happen by reading a written description of a beer. It doesn't just happen with reading that thing in the notebook and calling it a day. That's an incomplete learning. That would be a passive kind of learning model. Experiential learning requires active participation. You have to be a part of it. It's also not centered on the educator. I kind of already touched on this. It's centered on the learner. So it doesn't involve teaching at or talking over. To have the room for reflective observation, a safe environment needs to be created to reflect and experiment on what they are experiencing. It's also not restrictive or intimidating. This has to be a judgment-free space to try out the language. And you might be thinking about the space that you have for your sensory panel, for instance, and it might not check these boxes. They need to be pretty free, open, and it can't be restrictive or intimidating. It also can't be without context. I hate using a double negative, but it can't be absent of context. If they're tasting something but have no context for why they're tasting it or where it applies, the concept just simply won't stick. I already gave an example of, experiencing ethyl butyrate, but without having a reason to really understand why that matters or where it goes in context of beer. So if your staff is to learn how to do this on their own, which is the goal, then these, frameworks need to be built that connect the flavor to materials, to styles, to even maybe the history of beer, something that they can use how a beer might taste if they only had part of the story. So this is why flavor training is really only as good as the experience that you create around it. So what does this look like? I'm going to see if this works. Hopefully this works. This is a little video. I just visited some of my friends at Olfactory Brewing Company. This is my friend Nelson, and he was, I'm just going to tell you what he's doing. So he's having time to have a concrete experience. He is tasting a product and being guided through how to taste the product in the first case. He's also having time to reflect on his experience with the product. And then he's given some sort of framework with what the beer marketing description might be. And he's using what he's learned about beer in past lessons to essentially fill in his experience of the product and be given feedback and told whether or not he's correct. And there he is. He's correct. So that was a quick 1 minute, and then you have an idea of what the West Coast IPA tastes like. It's all these different things. So he had this. Oh, there you go. I'm not going to do it again. So this was kind of just a really quick, silly little illustration of what it might look like to put all of this together. He was given a concrete experience. So he was given something to taste. He was brought through a distilled down form of what that product is essentially supposed to be like. He was given a time to reflect on his own experience, fail in private, even though I was recording the screen. So he was failing kind of publicly. He didn't fail. And then he was able to kind of put his concepts that he had learned before into action and actively experiment and get that feedback. So I already kind of went over this, but what just happened? He experienced a new beer. So if you start at the top of this cycle for the ELT kind of theory, the experiential learning theory, you see that he had that concrete experience. He was then able to reflect on the experience that he had. He was given that time to reflect. You didn't see this, but there would have been an option to kind of talk out what he might be experiencing without kind of making those guesses right away. So he was able to talk it out, try using the language that was in front of him. And then he was able to connect what he was experiencing to what he already knew, and he learned how it actually applied to the beer and to what he's selling. So why does this work? Why is this approach effective? It takes, beer is complicated. I've been studying beer for like about 15 years, and I still don't know everything about it. I'm sure many people in this virtual space have been studying it for longer than I have, and it's complicated. There's a lot to know. There's a lot to learn, and there's always something new that's coming out about beer. So it's complicated. So we break it down into these kind of bite-sized chunks. Do you get the whole picture of beer? Absolutely not. And that's on purpose. You need to be able to break it down into these bite-sized chunks that allow you to build concepts moving forward. In Spanish, I was using soy without knowing what that actually meant until like this week. And now I know what it means. I'm on week like 4, so the Spanish speakers, don't judge me. So you start using these things because you've been taught them, and then you end up building more perspective as you learn more. And that's the idea here. You have to break it down into these bite-sized pieces. This also uses implicit learning. So I haven't used that word yet, but it's essentially learning without knowing. So implicit learning is like Duolingo, similar to that. So you're having fun, you have this engaging experience, but you're also learning without really being aware of the fact that you're learning. I always kind of liken this to accidental exercise. Like I don't exercise, I just like have fun. Like I accidentally, like I go on a bike ride and like I'm having fun riding my bike, but I'm actually accidentally exercising. It's the same thing. It's like implicit learning is just, learning without knowing that you're doing it, or exercising without knowing that you're doing it. It also integrates repetition. So this is how you build your memory. If anybody's doing Duolingo now, you get the same question like 10 times in a row. It doesn't really register to you that you're seeing the same question. But in order to get that repetition, in order to get that memory, you do have to have some level of repetition in different contexts. It's experiential. So we have that space to experience, to reflect, to apply, to act. I can explain what resinous tastes like to you, but until you smell it and until you describe it yourself, you don't really know what resinous is. And again, it allows you to fail privately. And then communal. So this directly applies, it's connected. It directly applies to your tap list. It connects to what actually matters, what they actually need to know about your product. So the result of this is a staff that can now confidently converse with brewers and also with customers, but this is our little brewer bud. So, an interaction like this is going to go a little bit more seamlessly if your staff has context for flavors and knows enough about different styles to be able to converse confidently with your brewers. So maybe a brewer might ask, hey, check out this new beer. What are your thoughts? And they are now capable of giving you more accurate and useful information about the product if they had this context. So now our staff is ready for conversing with brewers and maybe even offering some level of feedback. And of course, this is, the most important piece when it comes to front of house. They're now more confident conversing with your customers. If a customer comes in and asks, Do you have anything dank and hoppy? If your front of house knows generally what dank and hoppy is and how to contextualize that, and know that they can connect dank and hoppy to IPA, and specifically maybe your West Coast IPA, they can make those recommendations in a really solid way. So this customer conversation is something that can go a little bit more seamlessly if they had this experience. So hopefully you got a better idea of what the experiential learning theory is, how it kind of applies, how you might be able to bite off some of those techniques and apply that theory to a training program. And this is, going back to what our original thought experiment was. It was all with the purpose of creating something that is made specifically for companies that really have no time to train, no expertise, well, not expertise, but no time, very few resources, and no administrator. So the platform that we've been building over the last year at least is called DraughtLab Learning. So it's brand new, hot onto the market. It keeps your staff up to date with these interactive lessons focused on your products, focused on what actually matters for selling your products to your customers. It is built specifically for tap rooms by experts in the field, with no need for an administrator. It's easy to use, and it's easy to train your staff with our new DraughtLab Learning product. So I would encourage all of you to check it out. I really feel like it is something that's very timely for where our industry is right now. I'm really proud of it. It's really, really fun. I'm having a great time with it. And we kind of go through, all you need to know in these little bite-sized chunks. So that's DraughtLab Learning. We also have a product that goes alongside DraughtLab Learning. They're called Aroma Kits. Really fun. This is just something that you can do with your staff. They're affordable, and they are our own kind of flavor standards that help your tasters learn more about what your products are supposed to taste like, and give you a clearer language around what a hazy IPA is supposed to taste like. And like I just said, hazy IPA is an example. And like I said earlier, training is really only as good as the experience that you create around it. So we created this whole experience around experiencing those aromas so that your tasters really gain a deep understanding, an experiential understanding of various flavors that can make up what a product is supposed to taste like. So that is our aroma kits. I think that QR code gets you over there, or at least gets you to DraughtLab Learning, learning.draughtLab.com. And again, I would encourage everybody to check it out, and would be so happy to take questions and get any kind of feedback. So thank you. I guess I won't take questions. So anyway, I guess that's it for me then. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, I didn't join the chat, so sorry about that. But thank you for being here. I really, again, appreciated being a part of the craft beer professionals community. You can always feel free to reach out to me. My name's Lindsay. My email is lindsay@draughtLab.com. Or, of course, feel free to just use this QR code, and essentially I would get in touch with you as well. Okay, y'all. Thanks. See you all in the virtual space.